Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lisa Schaefer, and today is unique in that we have two groups of attendees. Some of you are here for Module 4 of the SWIMDER training, in which we've also included the amendments to the stormwater management rules, having previously discussed certain aspects in the preceding modules. This presentation should reinforce the earlier training. Others are here for just the rule amendment training, and this will be just the first presentation today. It should cover everything in the rule amendments, and I expect it will take about an hour. So here's the agenda for today. So as I said, first we will cover the amendments to the stormwater management rules, which were adopted in July. Now, rule amendment training is required within 1 year of the adoption of said amendments for those who review major development projects for a permittee under the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer or MS4 permit. So there are 4 parts to this first presentation. The general info I'll be covering in a moment, the rule amendments themselves, the Q&A session for just the rule amendment presentation, and then any final comments before we close that presentation out. So if you have not downloaded the course materials, there is a link added to the bottom of this slide, and you will find the slides for the rule amendment training under the header for Module 4, that is here. So after the rule amendment training, we will continue with the remainder of Module 4 of SWIMDER. We will provide plan reviews, which will tie together the material we had covered in the previous modules. There are 2 review examples, plus Quiz 4 and its review. After we review the quiz, we'll end the day with an update to our MS4 program, along with some closing remarks. So we have a rather tight schedule today. So to better respond to as many questions as possible, please try to type them in the chat and the staff will do their best to get to them. The moderator will also step in and answer things as we go wherever possible, and the rest we'll take care of at the end of the presentations. Of course, you are welcome to email your questions to the DWQ email address shown at the bottom of the white portion of this slide. And in case you missed the announcement, we are recording this presentation. Let's get started on the amendments to the New Jersey Stormwater Management Rules. As you may have heard, amendments to the rules, which are found in the New Jersey Administrative Code in Title VII, Chapter 8, and the Flood Hazard Area Control Act, or FACA rules at NJAC 7:13, were adopted and published in the New Jersey Register on July 17th. The amendments address one of the major threats climate change presents, that is, increased volume and intensity of rainfall events, and the attendant effect of additional runoff on stormwater management systems and flood elevations in riverine areas. This presentation will provide some of the history leading to the amendments to the stormwater management rules. I will cover the 2 definitions that have been added to the rules, and after that, I will go over the applicability to major development and discuss the legacy provisions, which are those projects subject to the prior rules under certain conditions. There's also a change to the allowable calculation methods. And after we go over that, there'll be a longer discussion of the multipliers to be applied to modify the published rainfall data and how these multipliers are used in the calculations for groundwater recharge and stormwater runoff quantity control. So I hope you find the examples to be helpful. I'm also going to briefly review the other updates that were made to the BMP manual, plus those to the FAQs and the Municipal Stormwater Control Ordinance, or SCO, as I will abbreviate it going forward. All right, so lastly, before we wrap up, there will be a Q&A session. Okay, so it's time for that brief history lesson on what led to the rule amendments and an overview of the studies involved. Executive Order 100 was signed by Governor Murphy on January 27th in the year 2020. This required that the DEP shall, within 2 years of the date of this order and consistent with applicable law, adopt Protecting Against Climate Threats or PACT regulations. Furthermore, it required the DEP integrate climate change considerations, such as sea level rise, into its regulatory and permitting programs, including, but not limited to, land use permitting, water supply, stormwater and wastewater permitting and planning, air quality, and solid waste and site remediation permitting. Subsequently, Administrative Order 2020-01 was signed by then Commissioner McCabe to integrate climate change considerations and so forth into the DEP's regulatory and permitting programs. In accordance with the executive order, the department conducted research and underwent several stakeholder meetings beginning in 2019, first as part of the PACT rules, and then again independently in October of 2022. The department released a New Jersey scientific report on climate change in 2020 and reports on rainfall studies in 2021. All of these were in preparation to address the impacts of climate change, which then led to the proposal on December 5th, 2022, and adoption on July 17th of this year of the Inland Flood Protection Rule. The reasoning behind the rule amendments is based on the scientific studies showing the data used for the design of stormwater infrastructure is outdated. It no longer reflects what is happening in our state, so much so that in November 2021, the Northeast Regional Climate Center, which is a partner with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, abbreviated as NOAA, and the DEP, released studies showing that the 2, 10, and 100-year storms have all experienced increases in rainfall depth since the year 1999. Furthermore, reasonable predictions based on this information show that this will only worsen over the coming decades. So the areas with the darkest blue shading in this graphic are anticipated to have 100-year storms that will increase between 141 and 150% by the end of this century. More rain means more runoff, which means larger discharges, and we will also see more flooding as a consequence. Additionally, global warming increases both the energy in the atmosphere and the potential for more intense storm events. The science predicts these storms will occur more frequently and at higher intensities than those of the 20th century, and I will cover more of this shortly. So we've experienced quite a number of major flood events since the year 2000. Several of those are listed on this slide. In many locations, stormwater runoff is often discharged off-site, and with the increasing intensity and rainfall depth, this will stress our infrastructure, such as bridges, roadways, and stormwater management systems, and will create further problems down gradient of the discharge points. This in turn increases risks to the inhabitants and properties. So keep in mind that New Jersey is the most densely populated state, and most of the population centers are in the floodplain. So adding climate change on top of worsening flooding is just going to compound the issue and make things unsustainable. NOAA's rainfall precipitation and intensity data, published in Atlas 14, Volume 1, or on NOAA's Precipitation Frequency Data Server, has been used in stormwater management designs. However, the precipitation and intensity were based on data collected from weather stations ending in 1999. And that means the design doesn't really reflect the precipitation we're experiencing today. Add to that runoff from older sites where there was no stormwater management, and the impacts worsen, potentially wiping out infrastructure and putting people in danger. Climate change will continue to bring more intensive rain in the future. A stormwater best management practice, or BMP, has a long service life, And BMPs designed in accordance with outdated rainfall data will become insufficient to handle the increasing precipitation depths and intensities. So therefore, there's a real need to anticipate the increase of precipitation depths in anticipation of the effect of climate change and use the predicted precipitation depths to design stormwater BMPs. So the adopted rule amendments are what is required to address these impacts. So this information was shown just a few slides ago, and we're just going to move on to the changes made to the stormwater management rules. So the rules are found at NJAC 7:8, and they were amended to address the role of climate change in BMP design, like I said. So first, I'm going to provide a guide as to which subsections were amended. So let's start with Chapter 1 of the rules. And I've underlined the subsections where the rules were amended, namely subsections 1.2 and 1.6. And the details of those changes will be discussed momentarily. And listed on this slide is the layout for subchapter 5 in the rules. Within this subchapter, the rule adoption amended only the underlined subsections, namely 5.4, 5.6, and 5.7. And I will discuss those after I go over the changes made in subchapter 1. So to provide some visual structure to the slides, all of the slides that follow that are for the stormwater management rules are going to be in a dark teal green for a background. They're going to have a deep red box or tab on the upper right. I've further divided these so that the slides for subchapter 1 will have this light bluish green stripe on the left, while those specifically for the calculation sections of the rules will have a deep red stripe. And then just to keep it further separate, I've used other formats and colors for the other sections of this presentation to break it up. Okay, so the amendment adds 2 definitions regarding public transportation projects that are subject to the rules in effect prior to this rule adoption, depending on when the public transportation projects achieve a certain status. So a public roadway or railroad means a pathway for use by motor vehicles or trains that is intended for public use and is constructed by or on behalf of a public transportation entity. A public roadway or railroad does not include a roadway or railroad constructed as part of a private development, regardless of whether the roadway or railroad is ultimately to be dedicated to and or maintained by a governmental entity. And a public transportation entity means a federal, state, county, or municipal government, an independent state authority, or a statutorily authorized public-private partnership program pursuant to public laws of 2018 at the citation listed here that performs a public roadway or railroad project that includes new construction, expansion, reconstruction, or improvement of a public roadway or railroad. Now note that a public transportation entity includes municipalities and counties that perform public roadway or railroad projects, but does not include the roadway within a private development, but dedicated to the municipalities or counties or to be maintained by the municipalities or counties. The applicability section of the rules indicates that all major development that doesn't fall under item B is subject to the rule amendments. So for the purpose of this presentation, we would call this portion of the rules the legacy provision. A major development project that does not need those permits listed in section 1.6C, which are a flood hazard area, a freshwater wetlands, a CAFRA, a waterfront development, or a highlands permit from the department, and has submitted an application for the approvals listed in Romanets 1 through 5 shown on this slide prior to July 17th will not be subject to this rule adoption. A complete application means that the application submitted to the municipality has all of the required documents specified in the municipality's ordinance, and the municipality's reviewer considers the application complete for the review of the stormwater management design. Note that the application and all accompanying documents shall include the documents needed for stormwater management. So if the application submitted to the municipality for those approvals did not include the design documents for stormwater management, the legacy provision here will not be applicable. Item 2 establishes the time frame for projects subject to the rules in effect on March 1st of 2021, again, providing it included all the required materials I just discussed. Similarly, the same goes for item 3, except the rules are those in effect on March 2nd of 2021, and projects are also subject to the same conditions regarding items submitted. So now for item 4, which is for projects submitted to the department. If a major development project needs a flood hazard area, a freshwater wetlands, a coastal area facilities review act, a waterfront development, or a highlands permit, and those permit approvals need a stormwater management review component, is technically complete and has been submitted prior to July 17th, it is subject to either the rules in effect on March 1st of 2021 or the rules in effect from March 2nd, 2021 through July 16th, 2023, depending on when it was submitted, and provided everything required by the department's rules for those permits plus the application form are submitted prior to July 17th of 2023. And take note that technically complete means that each item included in an application provides sufficient information for the department to declare the application complete for review, public comment, or public hearing. So these are those department permits I mentioned earlier, along with where they are found in the New Jersey statutes. Moving on, exemptions expire with the expiration, termination, or other loss of duration or effect of either one of the qualifying local approvals or department permits, whichever comes first. The expiration of local approvals under B1 above shall be governed by local ordinance. And in the event there are multiple qualifying department permits under item C, the expiration date is governed by that permit, which expires last, provided that the permit is still in effect. So once the exemption expires, the major development shall be subject to all requirements of this chapter upon reapplication for that permit and all subsequent permits or local approvals under the municipal land use law. And there's also one more citation for limits on those exemptions. And this next bit is really important. The aforementioned exemption is limited to the land area and the scope of the project addressed by the qualifying applications or subsequent approvals. The review agency will consider the impacts from any revision, including but not limited to the items listed here, and may deem the exemption void if the revisions do not have a de minimis impact. So an additional legacy provision exists for certain public roadway and railroad projects it is found at subsection 1.6F in the stormwater management rules. Public transportation entities must demonstrate that the project has determined a preferred alternative or has reached an equivalent milestone prior to the rule adoption. The logic is that these projects have already undergone a significant level of planning and design such that revising the project now to meet the new rules would be a waste of public funds. So next are 4 examples to help clarify the applicability portion of the rule adoption. To start things off, I have 2 examples for projects where a department permit is required, and for example 1, a non-residential major development submits an application for the department's Flood Hazard Area Control Act permit with a stormwater review component on August 1st of 2023 and is deemed technically complete. The non-residential major development also submits an application to the township for a preliminary site plan approval on August 1st of 2023, but the township's SCO is still in alignment with the rules in effect prior to July 17th, that is, the prior rules. So what rules or ordinance are applicable to this non-residential development? The answer is that the department will review the stormwater component of the application under the stormwater management rules adopted on July 17th, okay, the adopted rules. So therefore, the non-residential major development shall have in its design stormwater management measures in accordance with the adopted rules. However, the township will review the stormwater management under its SCO pursuant to the prior rules. Now, since the design complying with the adopted rules is supposed to be more comprehensive and has a higher capacity than the design under the prior rules, the design under the adopted rules should be able to pass the stormwater control ordinance in effect pursuant to the prior rules. So for the second example, in this case, we have a non-residential major development that has submitted an application for a flood hazard permit with a stormwater review component on June 1st of 2023 and was also deemed technically complete. The non-residential major development also submitted an application to the township for a preliminary site plan approval on December 1st of 2023. And by this time, the township's SCO had been amended to be consistent with the rules adopted on July 17th, when the application was submitted to the township. So what rules and ordinance are applicable to this non-residential major development? Okay, so the department will review the stormwater component of the application under the rules in effect on July 16th of 2023. All right, the prior rules. However, the non-residential major development will need to redesign its stormwater management to comply with the township's SCO pursuant to the adopted rules. Receipt of the department's approvals on the stormwater management design does not necessarily secure the township's approval. The township's reviewer shall apply the township's SCO pursuant to the adopted rules when reviewing the stormwater management of the non-residential major development. Okay, and now I have 2 examples in which a permit from the department is not required. So in this case, we have a non-residential major development submitting an application to the township for preliminary site plan approval on December 1st of this year, but the SCO is still in alignment with the rules in effect prior to July 17th. So they're operating under the prior rules. The project will not require a department permit as described in the list published in the rules at subsection 1.6c. So the question is the project subject to the amended stormwater management rules? Okay, the township will review the stormwater management under its SCO pursuant to the prior rules, provided the submittal includes all of the required documents prior to the township amending its SCO pursuant to the July 17th, 2023 amendments to the stormwater management rules. So pursuant to the requirements of the MS4 permit, the township must review its SCO to align with the amended rules and have it be in effect within 1 year of the rule adoption. And for our last example, another major non-residential major development submitted an application to the township for a preliminary site plan approval on December 1st. And by this time, the SCO had been amended to be consistent with the rules adopted on July 17th, when the application was submitted. Again, no permit is required from the department. So is the project subject to the amended stormwater management rules? The non-residential major development will need to design its stormwater management to comply with the township's SCO pursuant to the adopted rules. And the township reviewer shall apply the township's stormwater control ordinance pursuant to the adopted rules when reviewing the stormwater management of the non-residential development. Okay, so moving forward, the slides with this red stripe on the left all pertain to Subchapter 5 in the Stormwater Management Rules. There are no changes to subsections 5.1, Scope, 5.2, Stormwater Measures for Major Development, 5.3, Green Infrastructure Standards, 5.5, Water Quality, 5.8, Maintenance, or 5.9, Technical Sources. But I'm going to handle the remainder of the subchapters out of order, starting with 5.7, computational methods, as this impacts the remaining subsections that I'm going to cover. So there is a change in the allowable computation methods, namely only the NRCS methodology is found in the adopted rules. So take note that the NRCS methodology must be used when calculating the water quality design storm. And throughout the remainder of this presentation, I'm going to do my best to give you the page citations from the BMP manual. And this information that you see here is included under item 13 on page 32 of chapter 5 in the BMP manual. Okay, you may also refer to the National Engineering Handbook, or NEH, which is available at the link that I've provided on this slide. You may no longer use the rational method nor the modified rational method to calculate stormwater runoff, whether for groundwater recharge, stormwater runoff quantity control, or water quality. The rationales and the justifications to eliminate the rational method and modified rational method are addressed in the rule adoption notice that is available on the department's website. We will not repeat them here. But just a note, the rational method is still applicable for storm sewer or drainage system design pursuant to the residential site improvement standards that you would find in the administrative code under under 7:21-7.2 C5. So when using the NRCS methodology, slope, cover condition, and precipitation depths are the parameters we need to know in order to perform the calculations. So let's talk about the requirements for the precipitation depths that are used in these calculations. So the rule amendments require calculations be based on two different precipitation depths for your site, calculated by applying multipliers to the outdated rainfall data. I'm going to go through them individually in some detail, and when I get to each of the design and performance standards, you will see a summary of what this entails for your reviews of the design calculations. So the first set of precipitation depths to be used will adjust the 1999 rainfall data to the year 2019 for the 2, 10, and 100-year design storms. And this is what the amendments mean whenever the current design storms are specified. So to the right is a reprint of Table 5-5 from the rules. And to denote the adjustment of rainfall data to 2019, the precipitation depth we will use for the 2-year storm for a project in Warren County is 102% of the depth listed on the NOAA PDF server for the 2-year storm for Warren County. For the 100-year storm in Warren County, the rainfall depth is adjusted to 115% of the 100-year rainfall depth found on the NOAA PDF server. So the first example that I will present later today will illustrate the calculation of the current precipitation rainfall depth for a site. And if you aren't familiar with using the NOAA PDF server, start on page 12 of the revised Chapter 5 in the BMP manual as was published in July. Now, for a site that's in more than one county, you're going to multiply the rainfall depth from the first area by the county-specific current precipitation adjustment factor for the design storm specified, and then multiply that product by the percentage of the total area lying in the first county. You then do something very similar for the second area, but you're using the current precipitation adjustment factor for the second county for the same year design storm, and then you're multiplying that product by the percentage of the total area lying in the second county. And lastly, you sum the two to get the current adjusted total rainfall depth for that design storm. Chapter 5 in the BMP manual has an example. It is numbered B1 and it is found on page 18, and it depicts a site situated in 2 counties. As an alternative, you can use the county 24-hour rainfall data from the NRCS and apply the current precipitation adjustment factors from Table 5-5 in the rules for your county. And the county-specific 24-hour rainfall data published by the NRCS in the 2012 Engineering Field Handbook is reprinted as Table 5-1 on page 15 of Chapter 5 of the BMP manual. Now, there's a second multiplier required in the rule amendments. Applying the future precipitation change factors to the published NOAA rainfall data will allow us to look ahead to the period from the year 2050 through 2099 to address the future impacts of climate change. So when the rule amendments call something the projected 2, 10, or 100-year design storm, this particular calculation is what is needed. So to the right is a reprint of Table 5-6 from the rules. So what this means is that the precipitation depth we should use for the projected 2-year storm for a project in Warren County is 120% of the depth listed on the NOAA PDF server for the 2-year storm. And for the projected 100-year storm in Warren County, the rainfall depth is adjusted to 137% of the 100-year rainfall depth found on the NOAA PDF server. So of course, for a site in more than one county, it's the same method from the bottom of the previous slide, but you're going to use the future projected change factors. That means you multiply the rainfall depth from the first area by the county-specific future precipitation change factor for the design storm that's specified, and then multiply that product by the percentage of the total area lying in the first county. You do this then for the second area using the future precipitation change factor for the second county for the same year design storm, and you sum them up to get the future projected total rainfall depth for that design storm. So now we have to also talk about time of concentration calculations, as this equation uses the rainfall depth resulting from the 2-year storm event. Okay, here's the equation. You see P sub 2. Okay, now, although how to calculate the travel time of runoff in sheet flow is not explicitly stated in the rules, it's because the rules require using the current and projected 2, 10, and 100-year storm events in the stormwater calculations. The 2-year storm event used in the calculation of the travel time of sheet flow shall also use the current and projected 2-year storm events respectively. Okay, so time of concentration for the current storms will use the current rainfall data. That is multiplying the NOAA rainfall depth for the 2-year storm by the current precipitation adjustment factor. However, for projected storms, be sure to multiply the rainfall depth for the 2-year storm, the depth you got from NOAA, by the future precipitation change factor. And I'm going to say that if you're dealing with very small areas, there probably won't be much difference, but there certainly will be for larger drainage areas. And one other thing I must mention is that the rainfall depth of the 2-year storm, or P sub 2, that you will use or see used in the calculation of the time of concentration for the water quality design storm is based upon using the projected 2-year storm. It's a lot to remember. You will find all of this on page 25 of chapter 5 in the B&P manual. All right, so now that I've explained what the rules mean by a current or a projected design storm, we're going to go back to subchapter 5.4 in the rules, which is for groundwater recharge. And here, the rules allow you the option pursuant to 7:8-5.4b1.I to address the loss of recharge on an annual basis, and that's done through the use of the groundwater recharge spreadsheet. Nothing changed for this option. However, if you're going to infiltrate the difference between the pre and post-construction runoff volumes, you must do so as required under the second option using the projected 2-year design storm. Okay, so remember, the projected 2-year storm uses the future precipitation change factors found in table 5-6 in the column for the 2-year storm. So the design is going to look at what would happen if nothing changed on the site versus what site changes are proposed and their impacts at 2019 and in the future. You're going to find that there are examples 5-6, 7, and 8 in Chapter 5 of the B&P manual that will be helpful on this subject. And also, please take note that Chapter 6 of the B&P manual has also been updated to match the rule adoption. Okay, so again, it's existing conditions for the projected 2-year storm versus proposed conditions for the projected 2-year storm. Okay, so now let's move on to the stormwater runoff quantity standards, and they're found in subsection 5.6 of the rules. There are 3 options from which to select in order to demonstrate compliance with the requirement to control stormwater runoff quantity impacts. Now, under the bullet that you see here, the triangular bullet, is the rule text for the first option to demonstrate compliance with the stormwater runoff quantity standards. I've noted with bold the yellow text what portion of the rule has been amended with the rule adoption. Okay, so I want you to recall that 5.7c was covered on slide 25, and 5.7d, shown here in the text, was covered on slide 26. The bolded text will be discussed after we look at the other options for demonstrating stormwater runoff quantity control compliance. Similarly, there's rule text for the second option to demonstrate compliance with the stormwater runoff quantity standards. On the previous slide, the bold or yellow text is the portion of the rule that's been amended in the rule adoption. Okay, and last, here's the rule text for the third option to demonstrate compliance with the stormwater runoff quantity standards. And again, as before, I've bolded or yellowed the text that is the change. So regardless of which option is selected, the quantity control calculations required will have to include an analysis of the runoff volumes produced for both the current and projected design storms. So you're going to review the pre-construction, aka existing conditions, and what's proposed using the rainfall data to which the current precipitation adjustment factors are applied to do your comparison using the numbers that reflect what is precipitating in 2019. You also have to review the pre-construction or existing conditions and what is proposed using the rainfall data to which the future precipitation change factors are applied to do your comparison using numbers that reflect what will be happening from 2050 to 2099. That way, your review checks the design's work for what's currently precipitating and what we can expect will precipitate due to climate change. If you recall, I covered the time of concentration calculations on slide 27, but they also come into play here. And I will say that if you are using modeling software to design or review the accuracy of designs, I think you'll find it easier to create a separate model for projected storms, separate from that for the current storms because of the different rainfall depths. And you may also want to look at page 84, chapter 5 of the BMP manual, which has an updated summary of modeling guidance. I do have 5 examples for you today, but I see I'm running a little late, so bear with me. The first is applying the current precipitation adjustment factors to a site located in just one county. The second example will be for a site partly in one county and partly in another. The third is a comparison of hydrographs from the pre and post development conditions for the projected and current storms when the impervious cover is reduced by the proposed design. The fourth example will show how a design using a small-scale BMP will meet the groundwater recharge requirement. And the fifth example is sizing an MTD using the NRCS methodology. So for the first example, we're going to apply the current precipitation adjustment factors to the rainfall data for a site located at Trenton Station 2 on the NOAA NWS PFDS website. All right, so we go to the website found at the URL, and in the data description section from the drop-down menu, you're going to make sure that it says precipitation depth rather than precipitation intensity as shown on the left, okay? Similarly, for the time series, you're going to ensure that partial duration has been selected from that drop-down menu. And in step B, under the select location option, you're going to either manually enter the location using one of the options shown on the screen, use the map to locate the site, and then zoom in. Of course, here we're looking for Trenton Station 2. Next, you're just going to scroll down the web page to the Point Precipitation Frequency, PF Estimates section. Left click on the PF tabular option if it doesn't appear on the top of the other tabs. The others that are not needed will be shaded in dark blue. The data needed is found in the row labeled 24-hour. The values in the columns labeled 2, 10, and 100 correspond to the rainfall depths generated by our 2, 10, and 100-year design storms respectively for this weather station location as outlined in red in the top graphic. Then go to table 5-5 in the rules and look at the row for Mercer County since we're Trenton Station, Mercer County. Okay. To obtain the current precipitation depth for the 2-year storm, you're going to multiply the NOAA precipitation depth for the 2-year storm, which is 3.33, by the 2-year current precipitation adjustment factor of 1.01 to get the 2-year current rainfall depth of 3.36 inches, which is shown in the column on the, well, you can see where it is, the column on the right at the bottom of the page. All right, you're going to repeat the process for the 10 and 100-year design storms using the appropriate adjustment factor. And that's how you get a 10-year current rainfall depth of 5.09 inches and a 100-year current rainfall depth of 8.48 inches, also as shown in the column furthest to the right in our table. Now, if you're not familiar with using NOAA PDF, again, start on page 12 of chapter 5 in the BMP manual for more details. Okay, for the next example, we've got a site situated in 2 counties, and the method is to obtain the current adjusted rainfall depths for each of the 2 counties and then weight average them based on the area of the site in the respective county. So the site is located on a county line shared by Middlesex and Mercer counties. 1/3 of the site is in Middlesex, and the remaining 2/3 is in Mercer County. So in step A, we obtain the NOAA data and the current precipitation change factors and calculate the rainfall depths for each of the design storms for each of the counties. And then As shown in the second table, we multiply the percentage of the project area within each county with the current precipitation for the respective county from step A, and we sum the results. And then we get the final current precipitation depths that are found in the bottom row of this table. Okay, example 3. This one provides a scenario showing non-compliance with the requirements when the proposed development reduces the regulated motor vehicle impervious surface and increases the slope of this surface. So often for redevelopment projects, a designer may choose the option at 7:8-5.6B1 to demonstrate compliance for quantity control that for stormwater leaving the site, post-construction runoff hydrographs for the current and projected 2, 10, and 100-year storm events as defined and determined pursuant to 5.7C and D respectively do not exceed at any point in time the pre-construction runoff hydrographs for the same storm events. Okay, so for our site located in Trenton, Mercer County, an approximately 2-acre paved parking lot is to be redeveloped as an office complex consisting of a new building, a parking lot, and landscaping. The existing lot has a slope of 1%, but the redeveloped site will be regraded to a 5% slope for better drainage. The landscaped area will not receive runoff from the impervious surfaces, and hydrologic soil group C soils are present. Okay, so let's look at the projected 100-year design storm for this site. So a summary from the results of the modeling software is shown in the table. To correctly calculate the time of concentration, first, P sub 2 was calculated by multiplying the NOAA rainfall depth for the 2-year storm of 3.3 inches with the future precipitation change factor of 1.16, which gives us P sub 2 is equal to 3.86 inches. Here in the table is the summary information, and it looks like the results for the post-construction condition are less than the pre-construction values. But next, we're going to look at the modeling software to produce the hydrographs with the peak flow rates and time intervals. We're going to export them as data for input into a spreadsheet to create a chart. And although it's not shown here at first glance, the hydrographs seem to show compliance, meaning the post-construction volume looks like it is less than that for the pre-construction condition, meaning, okay, maybe the post-construction hydrograph will be under the pre-construction hydrograph. However, a close look at the hydrograph table data shows that this is not the case. A zoomed-in view of the pre- and post-condition hydrographs is now provided in this table. Okay, on the slide. So even a reduction in impervious cover should be reviewed to check the adjustment or change factors have been correctly applied to the appropriate storm calculations, and then the data should be examined instead of the hydrographs to make sure there are no exceedances. And you would similarly inspect the data for the other projected and all of the current design storms to look for other instances where the post-development hydrograph exceeds the pre-development hydrograph. It's a lot to grasp, and detailed information for this example is found in the one that starts on page 41 of Chapter 5 in the BMP manual. Remember, the rules do not allow a de minimis exception. Okay, example 4. This example provides a scenario showing the groundwater recharge calculations. All right, a 2.5-acre wooded lot is located in Somerset County. The lat and long of the site are 40.4573 and negative 74.5309 degrees respectively. The proposed development consists of a 1-acre office building, a half-acre parking lot, and a half-acre lawn area, plus half acres of existing woods that will remain undisturbed. We're going to design a stormwater management system to meet the rules, and the soils present on site are HSGB. we're going to assume that a small-scale infiltration basin is to be designed to meet the design and performance standards for the demonstration of groundwater recharge requirements by infiltrating the increase in stormwater runoff from the pre to post-construction condition for the projected 2-year storm. And we're going to calculate the volume of runoff to be recharged. Okay, I'm going to skip parts of the design calculation just because I want to focus on the groundwater recharge requirement. All right, so for this site, I've included the NOAA rainfall depth, the future precipitation change factor for Somerset County, and the depth of precipitation for the projected 2-year design storm. With a precipitation depth of 3.93 inches, the projected 2-year storm will produce an increase in runoff volume for the post-construction condition, which is 17,886 cubic feet, as shown in the lower table. So to comply with the rule requirement, this is the target the design must achieve, providing everything else is designed in accordance with the B&P manual. Okay, so we're going to move on to example 5, and this is sizing an MTD using the NRCS methodology. And if you recall, the rule amendments discontinue the use of the rational method and modified rational method for stormwater calculations. So now we will walk you through what is required. We're going to calculate the peak flow rate for sizing an MTD, treating the water quality design storm from a 1/4 acre impervious motor vehicle surface. So we have these parameters, and when you're using the NRCS methodology, you need to calculate the time of concentration, for which we follow the method. It's covered in example 5-1 of chapter 5 in the B&P manual, and that example begins on page 33 in the manual. It's also the formula that was found on slide 27. And as stated earlier, we use P2 for the projected 2-year storm in the T sub C calculation for the water quality design storm, but there really won't be that much difference here if we mistakenly use that for the current 2-year design storm, given that our drainage area is only a 1/4 acre. Okay, then we have to calculate the maximum sheet flow length using the formula for the McEwen-Speece limitation, and that's found on page 24 of chapter 5 in the B&P manual. And we calculate that to be 909 feet. However, the maximum sheet flow length should not exceed the McEwen-Speece limitation or 100 feet, whichever is shorter. So we're going to use 100 feet. And for our stated flow path length of 110 feet, that only leaves 10 feet of shallow concentrated flow. So the T sub C is calculated to be 0.8 minutes. And then we also have to use the SCS standard dimensionless unit hydrograph with a shape factor of 484. And this is covered on page 27 of chapter 5 in the B&P manual. And with all of this together, the modeling software calculates that the peak flow rate for the water quality design storm is 0.77 CFS. Okay, so every MTD has a letter you can follow along with there. If you need assistance, you can always reach out to us. Okay, we're going to move on now to the B&P manual chapters that have been updated to align with the rule adoption, and they are listed here. So the FAQs have also been overhauled to address various issues. Just wanted you to have the links all in one place. They should be active in your PDF of the course materials. Okay, so these are screenshots from the updated B&P manual webpage. Everything was updated to match the rule adoption as wherever it's marked here in red. Okay, so moving on. The FAQs have been expanded to address various issues, some of which may have been mentioned in earlier slides, and go all the way down to the bottom of the webpage above the blue footer. Look for the rule adoption date. And if you click on a question, it will expand to show the answer. Okay, now the updates to the stormwater control ordinance align with the rule adoption, and they can be downloaded in either Word or PDF formats. On the left is a screenshot from the webpage of the items available to download. There's the clean copy, plus there's a strike-through version to illustrate where text has been removed. And for this, the new text appears in red. It's great for comparing side by side with your prior version of your SCO. And lastly, we also have a simplified version. This one simply cites subchapter and section numbers from the stormwater management rules instead of listing the full text to reduce or eliminate the need for a municipality to revise its ordinance when the stormwater management rules are amended. Now, a municipality has to comply with the applicable laws and procedures for the passage and adoption of ordinances pursuant to this simplified version. Municipalities must amend their stormwater control ordinance within 12 months of written notification by the department of the need for modification and update. And that notification was sent on July 17th of 2023. On the lower part of this slide is a summary of the updates made to the SEO to match the rule adoption. And we also updated hyperlinks throughout the documents and cleaned up the appearance to make it easier for you to use. Okay, so that's about it for the rule adoption part of the presentation, but we're not done yet, so please don't move. I do apologize for running long. To summarize, the topics shown on the slide are what we covered today. We added 2 definitions to the rules, and then I also covered the applicability to major development and discussed legacy provisions, which are for those projects subject to the prior rules under certain conditions. Now, there's also a change to the allowable calculation method, and after that, there was a longer discussion of the multipliers to be applied to modify the NOAA's published rainfall data and how you use those multipliers in calculations for groundwater recharge and stormwater runoff quantity control. I hope you found the examples helpful. There, of course, are more in Chapter 5 of the B&P manual, and if you go to page 33 in the manual, you're going to find a table that lists other examples and everything else that we covered. Lastly, I briefly touched on other updates made to other chapters in the manual. I also covered the changes to the FAQs and the Municipal Stormwater Control Ordinance. So this is our contact information. Please continue to periodically check the website for updates to the B&P manual and other stormwater related material. Feel free to email us if you think of additional questions regarding the rule amendments later on. And I want to thank you all for attending this first presentation. Okay, so we're going to continue on with SWMDR in just a moment. And up next will be this is Anthony or Manesh with the GI fact sheet and example 1. Please stand by for my coworker to take over control.
Yeah, it's me, Lisa.
Hey, I thought so.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
All right, let me just pull up these slides. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So we'll move along with the rest of SWMDR Module 4 here. Let's get started with this presentation. So the earlier modules introduced green infrastructure and some of the regulatory requirements around it. And today we'll start with a review of the GI fact sheet, which you can find on our website. And this is in an effort to help better understand the rule requirements and how designs should meet them, and what to check for in your reviews. And then we'll go over an example that incorporated GI into the design, and we can evaluate whether it follows what's spelled out in the GI fact sheet. So let's begin with going over the green infrastructure fact sheet. So this part of the presentation will answer the questions shown on the slide here. To get right to the first question here, we covered in Module 1 what we mean by green infrastructure, which we abbreviate as GI. Dr. McGee also spoke about GI MTDs in Module 2, and we also included GI in Module 3. But to reiterate, a GI BMP is a stormwater management measure that manages stormwater close to its source by either 1, treating stormwater runoff through infiltration into subsoil, 2, treating stormwater runoff through filtration by vegetation or soil, or 3, storing stormwater for reuse later on. So the fact sheet was created to help the public to better understand that GI is very important for managing stormwater in that these BMPs more effectively maintain or mimic natural hydrology and provide environmental benefits by infiltrating precipitation to replenish groundwater and stream base flow. Also evapotranspiring and evaporating precipitation to reduce stormwater discharge runoff, and by otherwise intercepting precipitation to reduce runoff and erosion. There are also some co-benefits to using GI, and they include things like a reduction in the urban heat island effect, decreased energy use, removal of pollutants from the air through greater utilization of vegetation, beautification of public spaces, and even increased property values. So where do we find the GI fact sheet? This is a screenshot from the bottom of our BMP manual webpage. After navigating to the BMP manual webpage at the link here on this slide, which was updated in July of this year, the fact sheet for meeting the green infrastructure requirements is now found on the lower right corner of the webpage, and it's after where we have Appendix D, and it will download as a PDF file. Or as an alternative, you can use the link here, which will take you directly to the PDF file. The fact sheet is an 8-page document that presents and provides some context to the information in 7:8, the stormwater management rules, which will be referred to throughout the rest of this presentation just as the rules. And so this is a screenshot of a portion of page 1 of the fact sheet. And next, we'll take a look at what is actually in the fact sheet. But first, let's see what the rules say about green infrastructure. So here is 7:8-5.2a in the rules. And here is where you'll find that the design and performance standards for groundwater recharge, water quality, and quantity control must be met using green infrastructure. Under item F in this subchapter, which isn't shown on the screen here, is where you'll find tables 1, 2, and 3, which list BMPs and whether or not they are considered GI. So BMPs listed under Table 1 are identified as GI. Table 2 contains some large-scale GI, and Table 3 are non-GI BMPs. But this is just a review of what was covered back in Module 1 in the overview presentation. The tables also have important notes and footnotes that should not be overlooked. And if you need assistance in understanding them, you can contact us. So the takeaway from this is that the rules require a project to meet the design and performance standards using GI, and that means usually Table 1 BMPs will be used as they satisfy all of the requirements. Table 2 BMPs, as covered earlier, can be used to address stormwater runoff quantity control. When used for the other design and performance standards, Table 2 BMPs will require a waiver or variance to be used. And Table 3 BMPs are not considered GI, and therefore will always require a waiver or variance to meet any of the design and performance standards. So that brings us to the end of item 2 on the slide, which says GI is to be used in accordance with subchapter 5.3, which we'll cover next. So subchapter 5.3 is where the rules identify which of the GI BMPs have fixed contributory drainage area limits, and a contributory drainage area limit is defined in the rules as the area that drains to a stormwater management measure, excluding the area of the measure itself. So on the fact sheet, below the first paragraph on page 1, these limits are restated. So take note that the GI BMPs found in Chapter 9 of the BMP manual that are not listed here have one or more design components that limit the size of the contributory drainage area. For example, grass swales have geometric constraints that, and a maximum depth of flow limitation of 2 inches. And this design criteria will impact how much area can drain to a given grass swale. So next is how to implement GI into a project or make sure that it is properly implemented. So the fact sheet includes a metric to help anyone evaluate if GI has been properly implemented. With any design, The 3 questions shown here must all be answered with a yes for the project to meet the GI rule requirement. So that is, stormwater must be managed close to its source. The BMPs used must be distributed throughout the site, and any BMP drainage area limitations must be met. And the reviewer will confirm that the answers to these 3 questions are correct. So let's go through these questions individually. So the first one, GI manages stormwater close to its source. So let's clarify what we mean by that. GI mimics the natural hydrologic cycle, although stormwater traveling from this point here on the right has a lot farther to go than a drop falling here to get to the basin over on the left side of the site. Remember that clearing, grading, and paving results in much shorter values that are calculated for runoff travel times because pavement is much smoother than natural terrain. Plus, we typically use uniform and flatter slopes for parking lots. So in conclusion, the basin is not close enough to the runoff generated by the far right of the proposed parking lot shown in this image. And also, there's little opportunity for stormwater to interact with vegetation or soil with this particular layout. So this layout is not considered as meeting the GI requirement. So this is an example of placing BMPs close to the source of runoff. Here's the project description. A fully impervious 3-acre site in an urban redevelopment area is proposed to be redeveloped. The redevelopment will consist of a 1-acre building plus 40,000 square feet of parking area and internal driveways, and also a 1-acre overflow parking area. So a green roof and an underground cistern are proposed to manage the rooftop runoff from the 1-acre building. Stormwater islands designed to infiltrate into the subsoil are proposed to manage runoff from some of the parking areas and internal driveways. And a permeable asphalt system designed to infiltrate into the subsoil is proposed to manage runoff from the overflow parking area. So the proposed redevelopment is a major development since it will disturb 1 or more acres of land and is therefore subject to the design and performance standards and the rules. However, because it is in an urban redevelopment area and it was previously fully impervious, groundwater recharge is not needed. Additionally, the proposed condition reduces the impervious surface present on site in the existing condition, so there is no recharge deficit. So this is the plan view of the site from the previous slide. Since the existing site is so highly impervious, many of the non-structural stormwater management strategies required by the local municipal stormwater management plan could not easily be implemented on the site. However, due to the proposed GI practices, the project breaks up or disconnects the flow of runoff over impervious surfaces and provides low maintenance landscaping that encourages retention and planting of native vegetation and minimizes the use of lawns, fertilizers, and pesticides. So in this example, all of the stormwater runoff generated by the redevelopment is managed close to its source. And so we can answer with a yes to that first question on the GI fact sheet. So the next question to be asked is if the GI BMPs are dispersed throughout the site. The previous site was certainly a good example of spreading BMPs throughout the site, and this is another one. The parking stalls shown here are actually pervious pavement, and they are separated by traditional impervious pavement aisles graded to direct runoff to the pervious areas. Roof runoff also drains to the subsurface storage beds below the pervious pavement parking stalls at either end without exceeding the drainage area limits. So we can also answer a yes for this site. Now for the third site, the requirement to distribute GI throughout the site does not mean that multiple GI BMPs can't be near each other. It's important they be close to the source of runoff, like these dry wells are to the building for which they manage runoff, and they are distributed because they are on 3 sides of the building. So if this is part of a larger site where there are additional GI BMPs, This layout is fine, and a separate discharge for each of the 7 dry wells is not necessary, as long as no more than 1 acre of runoff is directed to any individual dry well. And that's the drainage area um, limitation for dry wells. And to be GI, they must each function individually for the water quality and recharge storm events. So if those conditions are met, then we can also answer yes to this third site. So let's look at another example here. The small-scale GI BMPs shown here are separated by berms and have contributory drainage areas below the maximum. However, all of the BMPs are concentrated in one area of the site. So you can look how far the building is from this cluster. Also the far side of the parking area. And notice how there are no stormwater BMPs on the right side of the parking area. So therefore, most of the BMPs shown here are not considered to be near the source of runoff that they're treating. And the BMPs are not distributed throughout the site. So in conclusion, for this site, the design does not meet the definition of GI and does not meet the rule requirements. So the last question to be asked is whether the contributory drainage area of the proposed GI BMP is less than or equal to the limitation found in the rules at subsection 5.3. And it's also restated on the cover page of the GI fact sheet. So small scale bioretention basins are ideal for use in parking lot islands, and where grass strips at the edges of parking areas or roadways are typically used in the past. The drainage area limit for a small scale bioretention basin is 2.5 acres, which generally is more than enough. Okay, so with that, that concludes the GI fact sheet portion of the presentation. And next, we'll be reviewing a plan review example that focuses on using green infrastructure. So the goal of this part of the presentation, or the goals, are listed here. However, we will focus on the green infrastructure portions. So for this example, we'll look at what was proposed and then identify if and where the design falls short. And then we'll mention some ideas at the end, which may have been incorporated into the site. So all reviews require figuring out which standards apply and then checking them for compliance. So the questions we must ask and answer are, what is the disturbance on site? Does it trigger major development? And will the project be required to do water quantity, groundwater recharge, water quality, and groundwater mounding? We will need to figure out also. We will need to figure all that out and see if and what applies and how they will be addressing those requirements using green infrastructure. So it's important to know what the site looks like, what the pre-construction conditions are, and what the existing land cover is. Plus, we need to identify any soil testing information. So let's take a look at what's going on in this particular example. So the property in question is a farm that has been a farm for a number of decades, and it comprises over 18 acres of land. The road running east to west at the front of the property is a county route with sizable traffic volumes, and the property is adjacent to some forested properties along the back lot line, which is also a stream corridor. And the property drains towards the stream, which flows to the south before crossing under a roadway east of the property via a culvert. So here's the topographic view of with the wetlands delineation and the 150 foot wetlands riparian buffers, and that's shown as the dashed lines. So the proposed development includes the clearing and grading of the property, construction of 25 single-family homes, widening of the existing road found on the right side of the plan, and another internal road. Both roadways will be constructed with 6-inch curbs and will each end in a cul-de-sac. The stormwater management report indicated 4.7 acres of impervious cover is proposed, without a breakdown into motor vehicle surface versus rooftop surface, and that breakdown is important with respect to the current rule. So we can start by checking the coverages, and the homes are about 0.35 acres each on average, which totals to 8.75 acres for the 25 homes. The proposed roadways are 28 feet in width, ending in a 50-foot radius cul-de-sac, and that ends up being roughly 70,000 square feet or 1.6 acres of new motor vehicle surface proposed. Additionally, the existing portion of the roadway along the east side of the property will be newly collected where no collection system existed before. So it also counts towards the net increase in motor vehicle surface. So I think we could safely say that these totals exceed the threshold for major development. So this is definitely a major development. For this project, compliance must be demonstrated by complying with the GI requirement for water quality, stormwater runoff quantity control, groundwater recharge, and if infiltration is proposed, groundwater mounding must also be is also required by the rules. So to address water quality and the green infrastructure requirement, 4 small-scale bioretention basins with under drains are proposed, and here's where they would be located. So first, let's look at the soil exploration map, which indicates that a number of test pits were completed. Although at the time this plan was prepared, only one central stormwater management basin was anticipated, as shown in the center of the site, probably due to the preliminary concept predating the current stormwater management rules. And as we know, major development projects are required to use green infrastructure best management practices, which are smaller in scale and treat stormwater runoff close to its source. So it's good that the designers realized that the single basin approach wasn't compliant and went with multiple BMPs. The reviewer would also want to check that for the revised design, the proper number of test pits and soil borings were performed. In this case, the soil testing report was not revised to meet the testing location requirements for the updated basin layout. So from the test pit findings, the seasonal high water table was determined to be at depths between 3 and 6 feet, mainly because modeling was observed, and the boxes here show these depths below existing grade. So where this depth is preceded by an asterisk, this is for the value in the bottom right corner of the site. It's indication that cemented soils were observed. Additionally, from test pits 10, 11, and 12, the tested permeability rates were far below the minimum allowed for a rate of 1 inch per hour, meaning that GI BMPs designed to infiltrate could not be used in that area. And lastly, here are the approximate locations of the 4 proposed BMPs so that you can see where or which test pit most closely corresponds to which basin. So now let's look at the drainage area map proposed for the site. So here's the drainage area map. The different color areas represent the different drainage areas, and you can see which areas are contributory to which BMP. Each of the BMPs are underdrained small-scale bioretention basins, and although it's difficult to see without zooming in here, but each contributory drainage area is less than the allowed maximum for of 2.5 acres. So that appears to me one of the requirements for green infrastructure, which was that third question that we asked earlier in the presentation. However, if we look at the layout of the basins, the placement of some of these basins are too far from the source of runoff, mainly the basins towards the bottom right of the slide. So basin number 2, which is shown here in blue, is not close to the source of runoff, which, as previously stated, is requirement for green infrastructure. Its contributory drainage area is not near the center of the property where the basin is located. Basin number 3, which is shown in red, is located too close to basin number 2. They're only separated by a berm, and the basin, despite being located in the southern half of the property, is collecting runoff from all the way in the northeast corner of the site. And something similar can be said for basin number 4, which is shown in yellow. It's the southernmost located BMP on the site. And although it may be difficult to see from this image, but it's also collecting runoff from the northeast corner of the site. So there is some engineering judgment involved in this, of course, and it depends on the circumstances each particular site may be subject to. But for this site, even though each of the drainage areas are below the contributory limit, most of the BMPs proposed as being GI BMPs are not located as close to the source of runoff as they could be, nor are they as distributed throughout the site as they could be. So this layout would not meet the GI requirements. So by grading these post-construction drainage areas slightly different than what is shown here and modifying the location of each of these basins closer to their contributory runoff source would also help to spread out the basins into a more balanced distribution throughout the site. Lastly, the green drainage area in the center of the site has roof runoff, or excuse me, roof area generated runoff that is not detained by any basin, which may be an issue when we address how the site complies with the quantity control standard. So now that we have determined that the site does not meet the GI requirement, we can cover the other instances where the project does not comply with the rules. So here is a basin section detail. The details for each of the BMPs otherwise show most of the requirements for online bioretention systems with under drains, which is good. However, the report did not mention the bioretention media specification, so that would be something to add in the review letter. Also, a maintenance plan was not included with the report. So without those two items, the BMPs do not merit the TSS removal rating, meaning that they do not meet the water quality standard. And this will also go into the review letter. So next point, the stormwater calculations that were prepared in 2022 used the Type 3 Type 3 distribution for the 210 and 100-year design storms. And as per the 2021 publication of Chapter 5, the NOAA C or D distribution should have been used. So that will also go into the review letter, and new calculations would be required. So this site would not meet the runoff quantity control standard. So for groundwater recharge, the report states the project demonstrates compliance with subsection 5.4 of the rules because all of the runoff is collected and infiltrated. That statement is false with respect to the current design. It may have been true for an earlier iteration of the design, but as we saw, they're proposing under drain bioretention basins, which of course will not provide any groundwater recharge. And in line with this idea that the proposed BMPs are providing recharge, the narrative of the stormwater report states that the proposed 2-year hydrograph volume is less than the existing 2-year volume, shown from this excerpt here. However, this narrative is incorrect and actually contradicts the report calculations, which show an increase in the volume of runoff by the proposed site. So the project will have to be revised along with the narrative, and no further detail was provided in the report on meeting the groundwater recharge requirement. And another thing to add to the review letter is a reminder that if the design were actually infiltrating runoff into the underlying soils, then a groundwater mounding analysis would also have to be included. Okay, so now that we've determined that this site does not meet the green infrastructure requirement, we can take a look at some alternatives that the unit here came up with, which would meet the definition of green infrastructure. But now, just to note, to preface the next 4 slides, we're not going to get into detailed solutions for this particular site or elaborate on the next slides. It's not really the purpose of this course. But I did want to mention just some cursory, or just briefly mention some BMPs that can be considered to be used on a site to meet the design and performance standards. Now, whether these alternatives are practicable to implement, of course, really depends on the circumstances present at a particular site. Of course, there's no one-size-fits-all solution to meeting the green infrastructure standard, and every site will ultimately require its own analysis. But with that, let's move on to the first of these 4 slides. So here's a site again, and just briefly, one possible GI BMP to consider would be a bioretention swale. That is, if the site provides the required separation from the seasonal high water table and high enough infiltration rates. Bioretention swales can be located along the perimeter of spaces such as parking lots and roadways. So another GI BMP to consider would be a pervious paving system. A pervious paving system is an option that can be implemented in parking areas or other applications where traditional pavement would have been used. And this decision, of course, must consider other restrictions, such as whether or not an area is considered a right-of-way or the possibility of subsurface utilities. Another option would be to maintain the use of small-scale bioretention basins, but alter the site grading to allow for the basins to be better distributed throughout the site, and we already mentioned that. And then finally, another alternative would be a multi-approach alternative where multiple GI BMPs are incorporated into a site to treat stormwater runoff, such as bioswales, rain gardens, tree pits, and dry wells. But again, the approach to incorporating multiple GI BMP types is specific to every site, and it requires an in-depth analysis for each particular site. Okay, so in summary, this presentation covered what is meant by green infrastructure, or GI, which is, just to go over it again, a stormwater management measure that manages stormwater close to its source by either treating stormwater runoff through infiltration into subsoil, treating stormwater runoff through filtration by vegetation or soil, or storing stormwater runoff for reuse. The fact sheet was created to help the public to better understand GI and how to implement it, along with examples of situations not considered meeting the definition of green infrastructure. To address water quality, groundwater recharge, and runoff quantity control, the rules require GI to be correctly used. And answering the 3 GI questions shown here when you review a design will assist in determining if GI is properly implemented on a site, meaning the GI BMPs are located close to the source of runoff, they are distributed throughout the site, and that the drainage area limitations are met. So, okay, with that concludes this presentation. Hopefully you found the presentation helpful. Thank you for your attention. Here's my contact info. And I think I'll open this up to Changi if there are any questions in the chat or if we're taking a break.
I think we can take a break, 10 minutes break, and come back while I'm answering the question that's been typed in the chat. Thank you.
Steve Colazol, can you hear us? Okay, we're going to resume in just a moment. Thanks for letting me know.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We're going to go ahead and continue on with Module 4. We're going to go with Plan Review Example 2 now. So the goals of this presentation are the same as those for the prior example. We will focus on whether the project meets the requirements for green infrastructure, and we'll look at what was proposed and identify where the design actually falls short. Then I'll discuss some ideas on what could have been done for this project. So let's take a look at what's going on in our example. We'll start with what the site looks like, what the pre-construction conditions are, and what is the existing land cover. The property in question, it's a site covering roughly 11.7 acres that is primarily undeveloped and wooded. Contains the abandoned ruins of a single-family residence and related outbuildings on the northwest portion of the site. The site runs alongside a state highway. To the west of the property is a conservation easement containing a ponded area draining to a tributary of a local river. And the site itself receives stormwater runoff draining from the east side of the divided highway. And there are some mapped wetland areas on the site as well. So let's take a look at the drainage area map for the existing condition. Here's a topographic view. As you can see, the arrows here depict how the site would flow. Some flow from the road to the northwest and some flow from the highway to the east. Everything is going to be flowing towards the southwest portion of the site, with the high point of the site being in the northern area. The proposed development includes the clearing and grading of this property. There will be construction of 152 age-restricted affordable housing units in a single multi-story building, a single access driveway, surface level parking, and multiple stormwater basins that will discharge to the southwest corner of the property to support the existing drainage patterns. The project will be constructed in two phases. The first will include 84 units, and the second, 68 units, which are located on the left side of the building as shown. From the stormwater management report, the narrative states there are 3 small-scale infiltration basins along the southern border that are designed to provide extended detention of the larger design storms, plus a northeast detention basin for the off-site runoff entering the site to the north and east. So immediately, there's a big issue with this design. All 3 of the basins proposed to meet the GI requirement. They're grouped at the southern side of the project. So clustering these BMPs together is not compliant with the GI requirements. Just remember, the BMPs have to be distributed throughout the site and manage stormwater close to its source. The proposed design is going to rely upon infiltration of runoff to meet the groundwater recharge requirement and water quality. So let's look at the web soil survey results, followed by the soil testing data before we evaluate the overall design further. So as you see here from the soil survey, the site is mapped as HSGA, which is promising for infiltration. So let's look at the soil testing findings. 2 sets of soil investigations were conducted here. A total of 20 test pits were performed. The first group, shown in green, are from April 2021, And the second group shown in blue are from January 2022. Here you'll see superimposed the three proposed small-scale infiltration basins onto the soil testing map to show which test pits correspond to the respective basins. Your review would also include a check of whether a sufficient number of test pits and soil borings were performed, along with the depth of the investigation, which I'm not covering here because we're going to focus a little more on GI here. I've also added the depth at which the logs show the soil permeability that were determined, taking note that groundwater was not encountered at any of these locations. The brown shaded rectangles denote results for other test pits. And for test pit 3 and 5, groundwater was encountered at 5.5 feet below existing grade. For test pit 6, groundwater was found at 6 feet below grade. And lastly, a perched water table was found for test pit 8 at 10 feet below grade. As with the blue shaded test pits, groundwater was not encountered at the ones I did not call out. The report shows quite a variation in the test results for permeability. So let's look at the table of the testing results. So here's that table, and I've circled the locations where the field tested permeabilities were less than 1 inch per hour. So unless soil replacement is proposed, these locations are not really suitable for infiltration BMPs. Given the low permeabilities at the encircled test pits, we'll have a problem with the ability of the orange and yellow shaded basins to drain properly, and we'll add this onto our review letter. So next, let's look at information found in the stormwater report, which states that 3 basins are designed as small-scale infiltration basins, but we do have to check if they really are. So this is the node diagram from the stormwater management report. These are usually upfront in the materials submitted, and I use them to look at how the site is modeled and make any kind of notations as I start my review. Basins 27P, 24P, and 38P are the basins numbered 1 through 3. They have superimposed the inflow areas taken from the basin summary reports, with the totals appearing in the brown shaded boxes. The node report shows Basin 1 draining to Basin 2, and that drains to Basin 3, such that the contributory drainage area appears to exceed the 2.5 acre limitation that's established in the rules and in the GI fact sheet. The connections between BMPs is something that has to be checked to determine if this is true. Remember from the fact sheet presentation that the GI BMPs have to function individually for the water quality and groundwater recharge design storms, and each has to meet the contributory drainage area limitation. So perhaps the drainage area map can provide clarification, and after that, we'll look at the construction details to see how this design is going to function. Here's the drainage area map for the post-construction condition. This shows the contributory drainage to each small-scale bioretention basin is less than the allowed maximum of 2.5 acres, which appears to demonstrate compliance with subsection 5.3. But we have to dig further to evaluate how individually versus connected the basins performed when it comes to the water quality, the 2, the 10, and the 100-year design storms. So before we dive into the construction details, I just want to say that I'm not including further review information for quantity control and groundwater recharge. For the required groundwater mounting analysis for infiltration BMPs, the only analysis was for Basin 1, and the most restrictive hydraulic conductivity with the factor of safety wasn't even used for the calculations. So this should also be in the review letter. So here's a close-up image taken from the plans, and I've added construction details that shed light on how these basins are functioning. Basin 1 is on the far right. It's the outlet control structure for it, A9. The top grate is the sole means by which runoff discharges from the basin. So since the grate is at elevation 63, you'll see the water quality design storm infiltrates, and the two 10 and 100-year storms over top the grate, they're going to flow to basin 2, which has outlet structure B11. And if you look at the detail, you'll see that the lowest orifice in B11 has an invert of 50, which is below the water's surface elevation of the water quality design storm that's contributory to basin 2. So basin 2 wouldn't meet the design criteria for infiltration basins according to our B&P manual. And then similarly, the lowest orifice at OSC 10 is below the water surface elevation of the water quality design storm. So in conclusion, basins 2 and 3, they're not going to meet the design criteria for infiltration basins according to our B&P manual, and they're not going to merit the 80% TSS removal rating. So these contributory drainage areas would most likely be larger than the ones that you would find in Table 5-1. They would be probably more suited for those in Table 5-2, which would require a variance before they can be used for quality and recharge. Waivers are for the enlargement of an existing public roadway or railroad, or the construction or expansion of a public pedestrian access, which this project is not. The next slide we're going to see is going to revisit the subject of variances here. There are strict standards to be met in order to grant a variance, as you know. More specifically, the municipality has to have a mitigation plan in place that identifies what measures are necessary, potential mitigation projects, and/or criteria to evaluate mitigation projects that can be used to offset the deficit created by granting a variance. Additionally, the conditions shown here, in part from the rules, must be met. The applicant has to demonstrate it is technically impracticable to meet one or more design and performance standards on site. Those reasons can only be engineering, environmental, or safety-based. Furthermore, the variance cannot be for the entire site unless an analysis is provided for each drainage area within the site. The applicant also has to demonstrate maximum possible compliance is provided by the design. So don't forget, there's also a reporting requirement for variances. What's not shown in this excerpt is item 3, which is about the mitigation plan, which has to be within the same HUC 14 and approved no later than the preliminary or final site plan of the project. Moreover, if the variance is for green infrastructure, then the mitigation plan must use GIB&Ps to manage an equivalent or greater area of motor vehicle surface. There are 7 other parts to the mitigation plan from this section of the rules that I haven't covered here. But in short, a municipality cannot grant a variance now like it may have done in the past. Since information was also not provided on mitigation projects, the project is not compliant with the rules again. So let's conclude the review of this example by answering the 3 green infrastructure questions for the proposed design, even though only one small-scale infiltration basin was actually proposed. They must all be answered with a yes for the project to meet the GI rule requirement. The B&Ps were not located next to the parking areas, so the first answer is no. The B&Ps were all located near each other along the southern property line, so the answer here is no. And it didn't look like basins 2 and 3 infiltrated the water quality design storm and were instead discharging downstream during the water quality design storm. So the answer for 3 likely is going to be no. So to wrap things up, this project does not comply with the requirements to use green infrastructure to meet the design and performance standards for water quality, groundwater recharge, and stormwater runoff quantity control. So let's talk about alternative designs that would be distributed throughout the site to make the project compliant with our GI requirements. There can be several approaches that could be implemented using the proposed layout to make it more compliant with the green infrastructure requirements. So here are some possible ideas to consider. The stalls in the parking areas could be constructed as one or more pervious pavement systems, or stormwater islands could be added to the parking areas. The west side parking area could have curb cuts to a grass or a bioretention swale. Clean roof runoff could be directed to some dry wells. The southern end of the eastern parking area could add a vegetative filter strip or a bioretention swale that's directing runoff to a small scale infiltration or a bioretention basin. The front detention basin could become a bioretention system for the additional aesthetics, or another bioretention basin could be added to the west of the main driveway. Additionally, the plan calls for a future garden center, so perhaps some of the roof runoff could be collected for use there. So that does it here for example 2. Thanks for your attention. Here's my contact information, and I will hand it back to Chang-Yi if we have anything additional we have to cover.
I think Cheng-Yi's answering the questions in the chat, so I think we can move on to the quiz.
Okay. I will share my screen. Good afternoon. I'm Peter Plantos, and it is time for quiz number 4. But before we start the quiz, we would like to remind you of a few important things. Upon conclusion of the course, we'll send out via email a course evaluation survey. The survey must be completed to receive either a certificate of course completion or a certificate issuing CPC credits. So, if you review for an MS4 permittee, attended all 4 modules, complete all 4 quizzes, and are required by a permit to complete this training every 5 years, you'll have to complete the survey before we send out the certificate of course completion. Likewise, if you are a professionally licensed engineer and you wish to receive a certificate issuing CPC credits, completion of the survey is prerequisite to us issuing any credits. Also, just to note that the slides and recordings for this training will be made available on the training webpage at the link here, and they'll be updated for future sessions of this course, which we typically try to host twice a year. As with the other quizzes, you may access the quiz in a few ways. The link in the middle of this slide will take you to our training webpage, which has the link for quiz 4 along with the other quizzes in the handouts. You may also use the direct SurveyMonkey link, which is shown here and found in the chat. You do want to make sure the quiz is opened in a separate tab on your computer if you do that. And then lastly, you may use the QR code, which is also found in the chat, and take the quiz on your phone. Now, when you start the quiz, you'll notice some of the quiz questions will be new and some will actually be repeats from previous quizzes. These are the questions that had the lowest correct answer percentage. So it's sort of a recap. As usual, we will review the quiz after everyone is finished. Please make sure to click submit at the end of the quiz to get credit for completing it. So it's about 3:20 right now. So we can meet back at 3:36 to start the review. All right, so here is the link and the QR code again. You may begin the quiz and we'll return back here at 3:36 to start the review. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're going to get into the quiz 4 review. If you're still finishing up the questions in the quiz, that's okay. Just make sure to answer all of them and click submit at the end. So let's get right into it with question number 4, true or false. Green infrastructure, or GI, is defined in NJAC 7:8 as a stormwater management measure that manages stormwater close to its source by 1, treating stormwater runoff through infiltration into subsoil, 2, treating stormwater runoff through filtration by vegetation or soil, or 3, storing stormwater runoff for reuse. The answer is true. The definition quoted here matches up with what is found in the rules. Number 5, which questions need to be answered yes when designing a major development to meet the GI requirements? And the correct answer is D, all of the above. So as found in the GI fact sheet, the stormwater must be managed close to its source, the BMPs must be distributed throughout the site, and the drainage area limitations, as applicable, must be met when designing a major development to meet the GI standards. Question 6. Which of the following GI BMPs has a contributory drainage area limit that is other than 2.5 acres? Dry wells is the answer. Dry wells have a 1 acre contributory drainage area limit per NJAC 7:8 5.3b. This information was also in the slides from the GI fact sheet presentation. Number 7. Unless a variance is granted, which of the following BMPs cannot be used to meet the quantity control requirement? And the correct answer is extended detention basins from Chapter 11.2 of the BMP manual. In accordance with NJAC 7:8 5.2, extended detention basins cannot be used unless a variance is granted. The presentation for example 2, specifically slide 12, included the information on what must be in place for a municipality to grant a variance from the GI requirements. Number 8, yes or no? Can GI BMPs be located near one another for the following scenario? There are 7 dry wells located adjacently on 3 sides of a large building. No more than 1 acre of roof runoff is directed to each individual dry well, and each dry well will function individually for the water quality and recharge storms. The answer to that is yes. This material is covered on slide 13 of the GI fact sheet presentation from earlier today, and you can find more information about this setup on the GI fact sheet itself. The important factor here is making sure the answers to the 3 questions for GI are yes. Number 9, which of the following is recognized as a co-benefit of using green infrastructure? D, all of the above is the correct answer. As described on pages 1 and 2 of the green infrastructure fact sheet, all 3 of these are environmental, social, and economic co-benefits of using green infrastructure. Additional co-benefits include increased property values and the removal of pollutants from the air through the greater utilization of vegetation. Number 10, yes or no? Is the interconnection between GI BMPs in the following scenario acceptable? A small-scale bioretention system infiltrates runoff for the water quality and groundwater recharge storm events, meeting the 2.5 acre contributory drainage area limitation. The 2, 10, and 100-year storm events are discharged from the small-scale bioretention system to a large-scale infiltration basin, which is used only for water quantity. And the answer is yes. From NJAC 7:8 5.2, the downstream large-scale infiltration basin can only be used to meet the quantity control requirement and is not subject to the contributory drainage area limitations found in 7:8 5.3b. Additionally, the upstream small-scale bioretention system fully infiltrates the water quality design storm and the recharge storm. Number 11. Which of these can be used to demonstrate compliance with the water quantity design and performance standard? And the correct answer is B. Design stormwater management measures so that the post-construction peak runoff rates for the current and projected 2, 10, and 100-year storm events are 50, 75, and 80% respectively of the pre-construction peak runoff rates. So only this option fully aligns with one of the water quantity options in the stormwater management rules. Number 12, true or false? BMPs from Table 5-2 can be used to meet stormwater quality requirements without obtaining a waiver or variance from NJAC 7:8 5.3. That statement is false. BMPs from Table 5-2 can be used for stormwater runoff quantity only. For them to be used for stormwater runoff quality, a waiver or variance from NJAC 7:8 5.3 must be obtained. Number 13, yes or no? Can the Delmarva dimensionless unit hydrograph be used for the redevelopment of a 2-acre entirely impervious site located within the coastal plain? The answer is no. The Delmarva dimensionless unit hydrograph must be used when modeling watersheds within the coastal plain region of New Jersey, with just a few exceptions. It cannot be used to size a manufactured treatment device, or MTD, as it may underestimate the peak flow rate entering the MTD. Also, for an entirely paved site, the significant surface storage associated with the coastal plain is no longer present, also resulting in underestimated peak flow rates if the Delmarva is used. Additionally, the Delmarva should only be used in areas that have an average watershed slope less than 5%. If any of these situations are proven to be present, the SES standard dimensionless unit hydrograph must be used. And a side note on the subject, if the Delmarva is used in the pre-construction condition, it must also be used in the post-construction condition. Same idea goes for the SES. Question 14. Soil testing logs prepared in accordance with Chapter 12 are required for which of the following BMPs? And the correct answer is all of the above. All of these have a minimum separation from the seasonal high water table, which you can find in their respective BMP manual chapter. Soil testing would therefore be required for all of these to ensure that they meet the required separation. Number 15. Which of the following would be exempt from the groundwater recharge standard? And the correct answer is B, previously developed portions of a site in a designated center. Just being in Planning Area 1 is not an allowed exemption from the groundwater recharge standard, nor is redevelopment automatically exempt. Only previously developed portions of sites in the designated locations listed on the slide can be exempted. Number 16. Which of the following conditions must be met when a stormwater BMP is allowed to infiltrate the entire runoff from the 2, 10, or 100-year storm? Correct answer is all of the above. Infiltration of the entire 2, 10, or 100-year storm is allowed only when existing site conditions are such that no runoff leaves the site for the pre-construction condition scenario, thereby constraining the design to infiltrate 100% of the volume produced by the post-construction condition for the same design storm. The maximum storm that can be entirely infiltrated is the largest storm event with no runoff leaving the site in the pre-construction condition. For example, if there's no runoff for the pre-construction 10-year storm, but there is for the 100-year storm, then for the proposed condition, the maximum design storm that can be fully infiltrated is the 10-year storm. And the answers for B and C paraphrase what is found in the rules. Only small-scale GIBMPs can be used to infiltrate runoff of a storm larger than the water quality design storm, unless required by another rule or agency. and soil testing of saturated hydraulic conductivity must be performed strictly following Chapter 12 of the BMP manual. Number 17, under the rules adopted July 17th, 2023, which of the following meets the groundwater recharge requirements? And the answer is D. The rules adopted July 17th, 2023 allow two options to meet this requirement. One is maintaining 100% of the average annual pre-construction groundwater recharge volume for the site. That option of meeting the requirement hasn't changed under the amended rules. The second option is to infiltrate the increase of stormwater runoff volume from pre-construction to post-construction for the climate change projected 2-year storm. So the change under the newly adopted rules is that the storm event used under this option is the projected 2-year storm. Number 18, true or false? Under the rules adopted July 17, 2023, the storm events used to meet the stormwater quantity standard shall consist of the current and projected 2, 10, and 100-year storm events, as defined and determined pursuant to NJAC 7:8 5.7 C and D respectively. And the answer is true. Under the rules adopted July 17, 2023, both the current and projected design storm events are required to be used in the design of stormwater management BMPs to meet the stormwater runoff quantity control requirement. Number 19, true or false? Under the amended rules, a manufactured treatment device can be sized using the rational method. That statement is false. Under the amended rules, use of the NRCS methodology for stormwater runoff calculations is now required. Okay, so that concludes the review for quiz 4. Up next will be Louisa with an MS4 program overview and some closing comments. Thank you all for your attention.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Louisa Lubiak, and I work in the MS4 unit in the Bureau of Najipti Stormwater Permitting and Water Quality Management. We will wrap up today with an MS4 program overview and closing comments. I will give a broad overview of these topics. The department currently has permittees authorized under 3 types of MS4 permits: Tier A, Public Complex, and Highway Agency. There are currently 557 municipal permittees authorized under the Tier A permit. There are also a few municipalities that are not regulated under the Tier A permit because they do not have an MS4. These municipalities are not permitted under the Tier A because they are entirely sewered by combined sewers and have a CSO permit, or because their storm sewer system is not publicly owned. The Tier A permit was last renewed in January of this year. As part of the renewal process, the department addressed EPA's concerns to reevaluate the Tier A and Tier B designations to determine if any of the town's MS4 systems needed to be authorized under the Tier A permit. We found that all Tier B towns required reassignment due to population density increases in urban areas or due to discharges to impaired waters and/or waters with TMDLs. Other MS4 permits include the Public Complex permit and the Highway Agency permit. We currently regulate 69 public complex facilities, which includes public colleges, universities, hospitals, and/or prisons. The Public Complex Renewal Permit is currently due to expire at the end of this year, so it is being drafted and anticipated to be finalized by January 2024. There are 33 highway agencies regulated under the Highway Agency Permit, including state and county DOT roads. This includes agencies like the Turnpike, bridge commissions, and the parkway. MS4 permits have a number of requirements, including these key requirements noted here. We will be going into more detail regarding these requirements later in this presentation. In the meantime, take a quick look at this list. Just to note, we have only listed some of the requirements on this slide. I'll discuss the enhancements to the Tier A renewal that became effective January 1st shortly. This is a list of notable changes in the Tier A permit renewal. I'll give you just a moment to read the list, and then I will go over some of the changes in more detail. Please note that the permit includes other changes. There are some new BMPs for maintenance yards, excess salt, and de-icing materials that have been deposited during spreading operations on all municipal roads and parking areas must be removed within 72 hours after the end of storm events. We are asking for a dedicated stormwater page on each town's website. Employee training for municipal employees has been modified to be once a year, and street sweeping schedule has also changed. Many of these enhancements have been made to address water quality problems, such as impairments and TMDLs that affect waters throughout the state. There is no change to this permit condition. The 5G3 Master General Permit was recently renewed with a few changes and is available on our website. There are two minor changes to this condition. First, we clarified the permit language to say that the design engineers cannot approve their own designs. Next, for any amendments to the stormwater management rule, training sessions will be necessary for stormwater design reviewers. This is because attendance at this training, SWMDR, is only required every 5 years, and we don't want to wait that long to train people on the amendments. Rule amendment training sessions pursuant to the rule adoption in July of this year have been announced by the department on the website and via email to all stormwater program coordinators and people who have attended previous SWMDR courses. This training requirement will also apply to any future rule amendments. Attendance is and will be mandatory and must be completed within 1 year of the adoption of the amendments to NJAC 7:8. We have added 2 new ordinances to the permit and are providing 2 new model ordinances to aid in the adoption process. The first one is a private salt storage ordinance requiring owners of private properties and businesses such as malls, shopping centers, etc., to properly store salt and other solid de-icing materials. The next one is a tree removal and replacement ordinance to reduce runoff and to promote infiltration. Some towns may already have similar tree ordinances, and if their existing tree ordinance meets the minimum permit requirements, the town will not need to adopt our model. Note that we completed evaluating the comments submitted on the 2 drafts and have finalized both model ordinances. There is no change related to labeling inlets. The change here is that all remaining storm drain inlets that have not yet been retrofitted due to utility work or repaving projects must be retrofitted by December 1, 2027. The entire structure can be replaced with an updated one, or you may attach a bolt-on plate to reduce the size of the vertical opening of the old inlet. In addition, all newly installed inlets must have a catch basin or other BMP to collect solids. We also included an exemption for the catch basins on bridges. This is a condition that was in the 2004 Tier A permit that was removed in the 2009 permit renewal. The reason is that at the time, it was viewed as a redundancy since municipalities are required to control erosion under the Standards for Soil Erosion and Sediment Control in NJAC 2:90-1. However, those standards only apply to construction sites, not necessarily to existing roadways, and we have received complaints about ongoing roadside erosion in various towns. The photo shown on the slide was taken by one of our enforcement officers who was investigating an erosion complaint. So we have reintroduced this condition in the renewal. Erosion checks can be done while performing other stormwater inspections, so you don't need to schedule additional trips. If problems are identified, we allow 3 months to address it unless another time frame is authorized by the department. We want to clarify and point out that inlet inspections and catch basin inspections are different activities and have different schedules. The condition of storm drain inlets can be observed with a simple drive-by type of inspection and a quick sweep or shovel if the grate is clogged. For this reason, we require that all storm drain inlets are inspected every year. Catch basins, on the other hand, require additional work. The inspector must get out of the truck to inspect the inside of the catch basin to determine cleaning needs. Inspect a minimum of 20% of the total every year on rotation, so that all catch basins are inspected by the end of the permit cycle. This is a clarification to highlight that the permittee is required to properly inspect, clean, operate, and maintain all stormwater management measures. This is a catch-all condition, since it refers to all remaining stormwater facilities not mentioned specifically in another permit condition, such as stormwater management basins and MTDs. This program should define what conditions warrant cleaning, proper operation, and maintenance of any remaining stormwater infrastructure and establish an inspection schedule that is tailored to your municipality's characteristics and resources. If there is not approved maintenance plan, towns can prepare a retroactive maintenance plan for certain infrastructure or inspect at least 4 times annually and after each rainfall of 1 inch or more. Keeping this in mind, that inspection logs must be maintained. Here you can see a list of the new or modified BMPs for maintenance yards and other ancillary operations. Note that the requirements that were previously included in Attachment E are now in the body of the permit, not in an attachment. All the BMPs listed here have been modified from the 2018 permit with the addition of a few new BMPs. For example, the Tier A permit will no longer authorize stormwater discharges from wood chipping or leaf composting activities, as these will be covered under the department's new wood waste recycling and leaf composting general permit. Some of the other changes include scrap tires must be stored in a covered container or enclosure. Inoperable vehicles or equipment can be stored on site for up to 6 months and inspected monthly. All containers and dumpsters that are stored outdoors must be covered at all times to prevent exposure to stormwater. If outside, bulk liquid materials must be stored in secondary containment, such as spill containment dikes. Aggregate material and construction debris can be stored on site for up to 6 months, but no processing activities are authorized under this permit. Cold patch asphalt shall be stored in a permanent structure or covered with a waterproof material on an impervious surface. These are the MS4 permit training requirements. The SPC training requirement is required for all SPCs so that they know their responsibilities for implementing their stormwater program. This is required once per permit cycle. The employee training requirement includes implementing an employee training program to address permit components and stormwater pollution prevention plan requirements. The SWMDR training requirement is the Stormwater Management Design Review training, which you are doing now. The municipal board and governing body member training requirement is training for board and council members. This training is a higher level training intended to familiarize those members with the permit and permit requirements. This is required once per term. Original Tier A permittees should have already mapped their stormwater outfall pipes and will now need to add the rest of their infrastructure. Mapping is an entirely new condition for the new Tier A towns. This means mapping everything that collects or conveys stormwater, including outfalls, groundwater discharge points, interconnections, storm drain inlets, manholes, stormwater conveyance systems, pump stations, and any other stormwater facilities you have. You are also required to map the property boundaries of maintenance yards and ancillary operations. Permittees must submit the MS4 infrastructure map electronically to the department by January 1, 2026. Electronically does not mean a PDF sent via email. Rather, it means submitting georeferenced shapefiles, geodatabases, or AutoCAD files with all other non-applicable data stripped out. The department has developed a free mapping tool for towns to use, and we can provide ArcGIS online licenses for free. Additionally, the tool has been updated to accommodate for any additional stormwater facilities and features that are required to be mapped. Lisa covered this information back on the first day of training. If the DEP mapping tool is used, data submittal is automatic. Otherwise, the files will need to be uploaded via the online stormwater document submittal service. The MS4 infrastructure map shall also be posted on the permittee's dedicated stormwater webpage when it is complete. Stream scouring inspection has been modified so that all MS4 outfalls are to be inspected at least once every 5 years. Municipalities must inspect 20% of the total annually on a rotation so that all outfalls have been inspected by the end of the 5-year permit cycle. Note that we broadened the scope of outfalls in the renewal to not just mean outfall pipes, so that will mean open conveyances as well. All new or newly identified outfalls, as well as complaints or reports of scouring, must be inspected within 30 days, and any reports of scouring need to be remediated within 12 months of discovery. The requirement for illicit discharge detection and elimination inspections has been modified so that all MS4 outfalls are inspected for illicit discharge at least once every 5 years. Municipalities must inspect 20% of the total annually on a rotation, so that all outfalls have been inspected by the end of the 5-year permit cycle. All new or newly identified outfalls, as well as complaints or reports of illicit discharges, must be inspected within 30 days, and any reports of illicit discharges need to be remediated within 12 months of discovery. These inspections can be done in conjunction with the stream scouring inspections. There are many water quality impairments and resulting TMDLs that affect waters across the state. Some of these impairments affect fish and aquatic biota, drinking water intakes that supply the water we drink, and even in rivers and coastal waters, where many of us swim every summer. Harmful algal blooms in many lakes due to water quality impairments are also occurring more frequently in the summer months. Some of these waters have no other discharges into them other than the local MS4s. Therefore, the department requires that each Tier A permittee develop a watershed improvement plan to determine what improvements can be made to reduce their contribution of pollutants that are causing impairments to the state's waters. This watershed improvement plan will be split into 3 phases with separate due dates. The watershed improvement plan shall be updated when necessary based on the biennial review of revisions to the impairments of the permittee's water bodies based on the department's integrated report and newly adopted TMDLs. The department has offered a Notice of Funding Availability, an NOFA, to assist New Jersey municipalities in upgrading their MS4 stormwater programs to comply with the requirements of the 2023 Tier A MS4 permit renewal. The department is making $75,000 in aid available to former Tier B permittees to meet the compliance standards of the newly issued Tier A renewal permit. Eligible applicants must complete and submit the application form to receive the initial $25,000 disbursement of grant funds. Applicants must then submit an acceptable stormwater pollution prevention plan, SP3, to receive the final $50,000 disbursement of grant funds. The department is making $25,000 in aid available to original Tier A permittees for the development, update, and maintenance of an MS4 infrastructure map delineating the location of stormwater features owned or operated by the permittee. Eligible applicants must complete and submit the application form to receive the initial $15,000 disbursement of grant funds. Applicants must then submit an acceptable MS4 infrastructure map to receive the final $10,000 disbursement of grant funds. To apply, just submit the appropriate application to the department. The application can be found on our website at the address on the slide. The application deadline is December 31, 2023. In March 2019, the Stormwater Utility Law, officially known as the Clean Stormwater and Flood Reduction Act, was signed into law. This act authorizes local and county governments and certain other entities the ability to create stormwater utilities. These allow for fees to be collected to be used for stormwater-related activities. Depending on the unique circumstances in each community, the process to establish a stormwater utility may take up to 5 years or more. There is a lot of information on our website that outlines the steps for establishing a stormwater utility and has many resources on how to do a feasibility study and creating a fee structure. Please reach out to your case manager with questions about stormwater utilities. Here is a list of the general categories which the stormwater utility fees could be used to pay for. Please refer to the stormwater utility website for more specifics on each category. I want to start off by describing the background and reasoning behind the creation of this new permit. First and foremost, importantly, wood waste recycling and leaf composting are federally regulated industrial activities and will need a NJPTES stormwater permit, whether it be this new general permit or another stormwater permit. While federal regulations require facilities that process wood waste or compost yard trimmings to get authorization under a NJPTES permit, those facilities are not stuck with the waste recycling and permit as their only option. Facilities may obtain authorization to discharge under an individual permit, an RF, a 5G2 stormwater general permit, or obtain the WRC permit depending on the level of exposure to stormwater. If a facility does not wish to obtain a WRC permit, but the industrial activities occurred on site and the source materials stored on site are exposed to stormwater, then an individual stormwater permit, RF, is required. RF permits typically have more stringent requirements, including additional BMPs and monitoring parameters. This permit was created to address current gaps in permit coverage from the wood recycler's general permit, individual permits, and MS4 Tier A permit. These are the permits that regulate stormwater discharges from some wood waste recycling or composting activities, but they are not all encompassing. The department's wood recycler's general permit, also known as the R7, expired in 2014, and a renewal was needed. This general permit allows the department to include multiple facility types and ensure that proper permit coverage is established for stormwater discharges from wood waste recycling activities statewide. Specific to municipal facilities, the 2018 Tier A permit only covered the temporary storage of wood waste and yard trimming materials and resulting stormwater discharges to groundwater and did not authorize discharges to surface water from any processing activities. Through MS4 compliance audits, we found that municipal facilities that perform these activities were not properly managing their stormwater discharge and therefore contributing pollutants to surface and groundwater. Since some facilities are not permitted, they are currently discharging stormwater from these activities with no BMPs in place. We also found that there are many facilities operating without a stormwater permit, including those listed under a solid waste exemption. However, operating under a solid waste exemption does not exempt you from the requirements of stormwater permits or other programs within the department. In recent years, there has been a more urgent need for stormwater management measures in order to alleviate water quality concerns statewide. These recycling activities can be contributors of significant amounts of pollutants, specifically nitrogen and phosphorus. By implementing BMPs at these sites through this new permit, we hope to alleviate some of these water quality concerns statewide. The Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, also known as the SPPP or SP3, is required to be submitted to the department within 3 months and then implemented within 12 months. The SP3 will require the following: a site-specific narrative description of the activities and their associated locations occurring on the site, inventory of source materials. It must also include BMPs to eliminate, reduce, or minimize exposure of industrial activity and source materials from stormwater discharges to surface water or groundwater, and BMPs to stabilize surface soils and reduce sediment transport. The drainage control plan and drainage control map must be included in the SP3. The narrative portion of the drainage control plan shall include time of concentration calculations, sizing calculations for stormwater facilities, and applicable TMDL and impairment information. The SP3 shall be retained at the facility for use by the permittee and for inspection by the department. Additionally, the SP3 shall be made available to the public upon request. We also want to note that this list is not all inclusive of the SP3 requirements, but these are some of the main components. Here are some additional permit requirements. Here is the groundwater monitoring discharge limits. I will not be going line through line, but feel free to look at it in the slides provided. Here is the surface water monitoring discharge limits. I will not be going line through line, but feel free to look at it in the slides provided. Storm event parameters should be recorded every time a stormwater sample is taken, whether monthly or quarterly sample. Samples should be taken within 30 minutes from when stormwater begins to discharge from each monitoring location. Listed here on the slide are the required minimum site-wide BMPs that must be implemented. Permittees can choose to implement additional BMPs to mitigate pollutant runoff and control drainage on site. First, site inspections are to be conducted quarterly during dry periods to identify and address any problems. Quarterly inspections are also required to be conducted during storm events to ensure that BMPs are functioning as intended. Permittees must also conduct annual inspections of the facility to assess all areas contributing to stormwater discharges, which may replace one of the required quarterly inspections. Moving along, the permittee must establish BMPs for site stabilization and dust control to prevent the transport of particulates and sediment, including entrance and exit stabilization and stabilization of areas that have a high potential for soil erosion. Stream bank stabilization and stream scouring prevention. The permittee shall design, implement, and maintain BMPs to prevent erosion and sedimentation caused by stormwater at the outfalls, and inspect for stream scouring. The permittee shall also restore any eroded areas in the vicinity of their outfalls within 6 months of identification of stream scouring. Inbound material quality control. The permittee shall develop and maintain a written quality control program, including training all facility employees involved in the inbound quality control program. All incoming wood waste and yard trimming loads need to be inspected for any materials not authorized by this permit, and contaminated materials are to be removed and disposed of properly. Material storage. The permittee shall store unprocessed wood waste and yard trimmings, in-process materials, and processed and finished wood chip and compost materials to minimize stormwater run-on and contaminant runoff. Where possible, the open side of storage bays shall be situated on the upslope. Material piles should be covered, and the area in front of and around storage bays shall be swept clean every day after loading and unloading. Spill prevention and response. The permittee shall develop and implement BMPs to minimize the potential for leaks and spills that can be exposed to stormwater and develop spill prevention and cleanup procedures. This includes properly labeling all containers, as well as keeping containers in good condition and tightly closed when not in use. Containers should be stored indoors, or if outside, they must be placed on spill platforms or clean pallets. Cleanups shall be done immediately after discovery. All collected waste disposed of properly, and any suspected release of hazardous substances shall be immediately reported to the NJDEP hotline. Fueling operations. It is important to note that this will only apply to facilities that fuel on site. The permittee shall establish and implement procedures to address vehicle fueling, bulk fuel deliveries, and the inspection and maintenance of storage tanks to prevent the exposure of fuel to stormwater. The permittee shall immediately repair or replace any equipment, tanks, pumps, piping, and fuel dispensing equipment found to be leaking or in disrepair. And finally, pardon me. And finally, vehicle and equipment maintenance. This BMP will only apply to those facilities that perform vehicle and/or equipment maintenance on site. Whenever possible, conduct these activities indoors. For outdoor projects, drip pans must be used, and for those that will last more than one day, portable tents or covers should be placed over the equipment when not being worked on. Here is a more detailed sampling procedure which we approved for the WRC permit. Earlier today, Lisa showed you the various chapters and appendices in the BMP manual that have been updated. Here are the chapters we are still working on to update in the BMP manual. Please take a look at these handy references with links for the topics we mentioned earlier. You can find our contact info on this slide. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat or unmute yourself.
Thank you, Louisa. I think we are already running over time, so that's the end of our today's training. Thank you, and thank you everyone for staying late with us. Thanks. Bye.